Hi, I'm Damon Morelli. This will be the fourth video in my Life and Learning Systems series. This video is the coevolution of language and the brain. This particular video will be a shortened, truncated version of a longer version. What I'll do in this version is I will try to just kind of superficially cover the ideas. You can accept these ideas at face value and move on, or if you'd like more detail as to the justifications for these ideas, you can watch the longer video. I tried to keep the longer video within 20 minutes, and it went 30 minutes, and I still felt as though I was rushed in covering the ideas. So we'll try to. This one will be a bit shallow in a way. I'll be talking about some general ideas of Terrence Deacon, and these ideas are taken from his book, The Symbolic Species, the Coevolution of Language and the Brain. The general idea here is that human symbolic capacity, and so as an extension linguistic and mathematical capacity, is not just an outcome of some kind of random fortunate genetic mutation. The innatist position, which is associated often with Chomsky and Pinker, who are very important to the field, is that the only way that we can explain or accommodate these language universals, these universal grammars that we find in languages throughout the world, is that there must be then some sort of shared genetic trait that allows for these formulations. I don't think that this is true. We will look at some more recent evidence that kind of discredits these ideas. Furthermore, this idea actually doesn't really fit very well with our understanding of genetics, actually, and the way that genetics works. It's certainly a bit more complicated. I think that the innatist position is a simplified view. But at the same time, though, we also understand why we need some sort of explanation because of, again, the existence of these universal grammars. So Terrence Deacon puts forward an explanation, a hypothesis for how we might be able to accommodate for some kind of innatism, which I'm not really sure is even necessary. But at the same time, though, his hypothesis is very interesting because I do think that it fits in with some of the ideas that we will look at later, particularly in regards to the work of Luc Steels, a Belgian researcher. So the idea here is that human behavior within a context, within its environmental, ecological, socio-cultural context, actually can reduce the role of genetics, can relax the role of genetics, and by doing so actually accelerate or reduce the constraints that genetics plays in the evolutionary process. This is a really interesting idea. So for example, symbolic capacity is not necessarily a fortunate genetic mutation, but rather we have human behaviors, let's say a human behavior of starting a fire, or a human behavior of, let's say, cooking food. That event can actually then reduce the role of natural selection, the role that natural selection plays in the evolutionary process. And by reducing the role of natural selection, it becomes what biologists would probably term artificial selection, is that you're actually changing the point at which certain traits or characteristics would eliminate individuals from the gene pool. And you actually, in the process of relaxing the role of genes in genetics, you actually allow other regions of the brain to become more active in certain processes, such as maybe speech processes. And so I'll try to very quickly make this a little more clear. So let's say, for example, that you chance upon the process of cooking some food. And chancing upon the process of cooking some food then allows you to chew food more easily and digest food more easily. Now let's imagine that in the past, soft teeth would have been a genetic characteristic that if your teeth were too soft, it would put you over a threshold, some sort of threshold, and that your genes would then be eliminated from the gene pool. Your teeth are too soft, you're not able to then chew food so well, you're unable to derive many calories. Compared to your competitors, you're at a disadvantage, you're less likely to reproduce, you get removed from the gene pool. Now through a human behavior, a social, cultural, which because it could be passed along through generations, behavior ends up changing that threshold so that this genetic trait now is no longer as likely to remove you from the gene pool. So this is what's known as relaxed selection, and Deacon characterizes this as a domestication process in which genetic traits play less and less a role in determining survival, reproduction, maintenance of genetic lineage. So when these genes, let's say, become less important to being able to reproduce and survive, they're no longer kind of constrained by natural selection. Whereas in the past, you'd need to maintain very strong fitness of these genetic traits to survive, whereas now you don't need to. And so over time, these genetic traits, these genes end up, the word erode, what's the particular word he uses? I guess he just says relaxed. Okay, so these genes kind of relax. And a great example of this that Deacon gives is that mammals produce their own vitamin C, with the exception of anthropoid primates, of which we are members of that genus, fruit bats, and guinea pigs. These are the mammals that do not produce their own vitamin C. Now, if we look into the human genome, we actually find that there are actually the remnants of the gene, the gulo gene, the full name I can't pronounce, the L-gulono-gamma-lactone oxidase gene. We actually have the remnants of this gene within our genetic profile, and yet it has eroded over time. It's become kind of fuzzy because our behaviors, our consumption of citrus fruits, has eliminated the need for us to produce our own vitamin C. So our ability to produce vitamin C is no longer constrained by natural selection. Now, let's imagine that we had very distinct speech patterns that were very genetically determined. And this would be he uses the example of bird song, is that many bird songs are very associated with these very basic midbrain regions, in that to produce the song, the songs that are produced are very characteristic of a specific species of birds and their shared genetic characteristics. And to produce that song, which then allows the bird to successfully reproduce, you kind of need the genes that allow you to do that. Now let's imagine that birds then go through a domestication process in which the ability to produce a song is no longer important in reproduction. Well, then that then sets the stage so that those genes can then degenerate, and so they diffuse. They're no longer as important. Well, then what would then happen to the bird song? Well, then the bird song might then, because of the degeneration of the genes and the relaxation of the role of those midbrain regions in song production, might then allow other regions greater opportunities to then kind of fulfill roles. And let's take, for example, that we do produce speech, and then because of relaxed selection, that the prefrontal cortex increases its role and it somehow becomes associated with speech production. And the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with executive function, and yet this executive function is a lot of it is actually a repression or suppression of more basic primal behaviors and urges. So its prefrontal cortex is kind of a social, in a way, a social realm of the brain. And so now this prefrontal cortex can then kind of take on a greater role, and if it becomes associated with speech production, we can see how speech production then can become a more social process, and it takes on the kind of more social characteristics and not just environmental characteristics, so that now speech production can now become coordinated amongst social individuals, irrespective of the genetic profile, or at least maybe not irrespective, but the genetic profile does not play as strongly of a role. The genetic profile definitely plays a role, and we'll see that as to providing similarities of embodiment that then allow for facilitate coordination of perceptual categories and knowledge and things like that. So hopefully this isn't too confusing. I'm guessing it probably comes across as a bit confusing, but anyways, the human species is very, very special, very unique. If we, the human brain, compared to other simian primates, here we have a distribution of the brain mass to body mass ratio, and we see that humans, Homo sapiens, are well above the where we would expect humans to fall given our genetic lineage. And what really and not only that, is our prefrontal cortex is exceptionally large relative to the rest of the size of the brain compared to other primate species. So really, what is allowing this? Because it's not just genetics. Genetics can't accommodate for how large the brain is, and perhaps it is that we chanced upon, again statistically here, we statistically chanced upon some kinds of behaviors, and here we're talking about some kind of maybe linguistic coordination, some sort of symbolic coordination at a very basic level, and that this provided an advantage to that group, or to any individuals who adopted that, and that then allowed their genetics, their genes, to be kind of passed forward into the future and gave them a competitive advantage over other groups. So that it's not just the genetics, but it's actually the behaviors within the context working in coordination and affecting genetics that then really allows the human brain to evolve, allows then, as well as that continues, is that the language evolves and society and culture to evolve. Some interesting research by a gentleman named Robin Dunbar, he shows that there is a direct correlation between prefrontal cortex size, relative size to the rest of the brain, and the size of the social groups of primates. And again, ours is much larger, and we roll in much larger social groups than most of our contemporaries. And maybe we can understand a bit of that, is that these things facilitate each other. It's a co-evolutionary process. Anyways, so give that some thought. Go ahead and give me feedback as to what maybe is unclear. I'm sure a lot of it's unclear. I'm still working through these ideas in my head as well. That's largely why I'm wanting to share these things. It helps me organize my thoughts, and also helps hopefully change people's minds as to how they really think about intelligence, the way they think about people's linguistic abilities, the way they think about people's mathematical abilities, and really kind of how we're not as distinguished and separate as we are, because part of the process of actually accumulating our linguistic and symbolic capacity is actually a very social, contextual, environmental, ecological phenomenon. It's not simple as saying somebody he is of good stock, or she has a good bloodline. These are just antiquated ideas, myths that we need to probably at some point let go of, so we can really facilitate, perpetuate this process of continuing to learn and grow together. All right, take care of yourself. See you around.